So I think that a water filter is one of the most essential pieces of trail running kit. But most water filters do not work the way that you think they should and might actually lead to you getting sick. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. But first of all, let's talk about the reasons why you might actually want a water filter in the first place, because there's always people comment on videos I make when I talk about water filters saying they've never used a water filter in their life, they never will, they don't need to, the water's clean. And that's probably true, because it depends on where you're taking the water from, the type of source, even where you are in the world, as to whether or not a water filter is going to benefit you. So first of all, I think we should talk through the 7 different scenarios or levels of risk when it comes to taking water from the mountains. And the first one is the safest one, and that is high mountain springs. There is a freshwater spring on the top of one of those mountains behind me, and the water from it is probably cleaner than the water that comes out of my tap. It's coming from, aquifers deep within the mountain. It's been filtered through the rock, and I can literally see where it comes out into the open air. There's no opportunity for it to be contaminated, and it is as fresh and delicious as can be. And I would never consider filtering that water. In fact, filtering it might even remove some of the flavour from it. Then you've got sources maybe a bit like this, although it's currently dried up. This is usually a little stream. There's a river back there. River mountains, river streams. They're still, fairly high up. A lot of them, you could probably drink from them and be fine. However, if you're in an area that has maybe a lot of people or a lot of animals, probably particularly a lot of animals like sheep, well, there's always a chance the sheep might poo in the river or near the river. And then there's always that scenario where you take water and then 500 yards later there's a dead sheep. That's happened to me twice. And poo and dead sheep are going to release bacteria, and there might also be some nasty microorganisms in that water that can make you sick. I know a lot of trail runners who drink from those kind of sources regularly, from mountain streams and rivers. There are several of them claim they've never gotten sick in their life, but for every 5 that say they've never gotten sick, there are 5 that have ended up with explosive diarrhea at some point after drinking from a source like that. So it's kind of you take your chances. Odds are 9 times out of 10 you're going to be fine, but maybe that one time you're going to get sick. Boop, 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 boop. And speaking of getting sick, you might want to go and check out the video I've made, which is called "The Reason My Doctor Told Me to Run to Avoid Getting Sick." True story. That one's going to be published after this video, so if you want to catch that, you can subscribe and I'll explain why I was literally prescribed running to fix my being sick problem. That's a really wordy way of putting that. There's a good example of what a mountain stream or mountain source might look like. A little bit muddy, a little bit shallow, but I have taken water from sources like that before. If it's after heavy rain, the risk is probably lower. If that water's been sitting there festering for several days. By the way, these are all places that I've personally taken water from. There might be some others that I haven't thought of. The next one then is forestry plantations. Now you might think forest trees, very clean, very nice, little river flowing through the forest. Well, that's going to be delicious, clean, and no issues there. But I personally have gotten sick from water that I've taken from a forest plantation. I was really thirsty one day. I had a very basic filter with me, so I thought I'd be fine. We'll talk more about why that filter wasn't enough in a minute. I drank the water. It tasted, grease. It tasted a little bit the way a petrol station smells. And I kind of thought, well, maybe it's just pine sap or something like that in it, but didn't drink that much of it because it smelled funny. But my stomach, not good for the next couple of days. Here's the problem. If it's a forest plantation, a commercial forest plantation, that means at some point there are heavy machinery that go in there and cut down the trees. And what do heavy machinery run on? Well, they run on diesel, they've got engine oil, there's chemicals involved. Those chemicals can spill, they can leak, get into the soil, get into the drainage ditches, and end up in the rivers. So all of a sudden, you've got risks from chemicals in the water. The next risk factor, you can see some of it away over there, is farmland. And this could be quite a common location you end up taking water from. And the risk with farmland is that anything that goes onto that farmland will end up, it's not if or might, it will end up in the local rivers. And that includes things like, well, slurry from cattle, which is nasty to start with. It includes pesticides, it includes fertilizers, and once again, it includes anything that leaks off of agricultural machinery. That will all end up in the water and potentially make you pretty ill, pretty sick. Here's one that I didn't consider a risk until I did the West Highland Way last year, and that is, well, the West Highland Way, popular hiking trails where there are lots of people, even in remote locations, because on the West Highland Way for at least a few years there have been cases of like outbreaks of norovirus among hikers along the trail, and norovirus is nasty. You're talking explosive diarrhea and vomiting. I've had it a couple of times. It is brutal. It is absolutely brutal. And why were people getting norovirus on the West Highland Way? Well, there are a lot of people who walk the West Highland Way, so a lot of people means a lot of poo. There aren't public toilets. You gotta go dig a hole and bury it or bring it with you. But in Scotland, the general rule is, you just bury it. However, there are some people who don't know how to do this properly, or they don't care. So they're going to the toilet quite close. You shouldn't go to the toilet anywhere near a water source like a stream or anything, but they're doing that. They're going to the toilet quite near the stream. Possibly, this is even worse, possibly they're going to the toilet, and because they haven't prepared properly, they might have no way of cleaning themselves. They've gone down into the stream for a good old scrub-a-dub to clean themselves off. And if that person is carrying any kind of nasty viruses, like norovirus, even if they're maybe not having symptoms, that can then make somebody else sick. And that, I think, is the reason why on the West Highland Way quite a few people ended up getting norovirus. Hi, sheep! Alright, the next risky place that I've taken water from has been rivers and rivers and lakes that have high volume boat traffic. Here, this would be the River Bann. I have drunk water from the River Bann, and there's been some lakes in Fermanagh I've taken water from as well. They're essentially the toilet of the surrounding area. Anything that comes off of farmland ends up in that lake, in that river, and then any chemicals that come off boats will end up in it as well. So those are all the different places with the different risk factors that I've personally taken water from. Your needs might vary. If you're only ever up in higher mountains, well, you're not going to have the same requirements as somebody who's potentially drinking, from a river going through a farmland. But let's talk about why your water filter might be letting you down, because the vast majority of water filters aimed at trail runners do not filter out viruses, chemicals, that includes things like pesticides, heavy metals, any of that stuff. They don't filter it out. Now, these tend to be filters, Salomon make them, Katadyn make them, Sawyer filter makes them, Life Straw. These are the filters. You'll notice they're called fiber filters. You look into them, you see this compressed bunch of white fibers, and those filters are fantastic, absolutely fantastic at removing bacteria and like microorganisms and that kind of basic stuff that you're going to encounter up in the hills like this. But they don't remove the viruses, they don't remove the chemicals, they don't remove heavy metals and things like that. So for me, a fiber filter doesn't quite cut it. So let me show you the filter that I've been using and the reason I use that filter. This is a terrible angle, but it works for what I need to explain. So first requirement, if you're going to use a filter for running, it needs to fit into a running vest and needs to be quick to use. So that's why most of them follow this kind of format. They're soft flask formats with a filter that's built into the lid. And you might be familiar with this if you've bought things like a Katadyn or a Sawyer or a Life Straw flask. But this one comes with a difference. This is a pure clear. water filter. And the difference with this is that this is one of the only, and so far I haven't found any other, soft flask filters. I'll just take it to bits. That's the actual filter itself. This will remove viruses, this will remove heavy metals, this will remove chemicals. This is a higher grade of filter than all of those fiber filters. The company that makes these, Pure Clear, they got a background in making sort of filter products for the military, and I think that included like masks and stuff, so they've got expertise in making these things smaller. So this tiny little filter here will remove the stuff that typically you would need a much larger filter to remove, and that's why I use this filter. Now the downside with this kind of filter is that it doesn't last as long. Those fiber filters, they're brilliant, they last forever. You can filter 1,000 litres through one of them. Some of them you can back flush. This, you're limited to, I've forgotten now, I think it's 200 to 300 litres, but you can buy the replacement filter on its own. It's 15 quid. And if you want to preserve the lifespan of it, what you do is you use it, you bring it home, take it to bits, dry it out between uses. And when I do that, I get at least a year, if not 2 years, out of one of these filters. And super easy to use. You got your soft flask, you put it in the water, pop the filter in, and you're good to go. Now, one thing you want to do is just wipe off any excess water on the outside of that, so you're not, so it doesn't drip down and you end up drinking it. And you just drink straight from the filter. The Pure Clear filter also will remove any flavour that's in the water, whereas the fibre filter will not remove all of it, at least in my experience. If I was taking water from a source that's quite peaty, so you can usually tell the water's maybe like, has like a brown colour to it, maybe looks a little bit like Coca-Cola. You filter that with a fibre filter, and as long as there's no really nasty stuff in it, you'll be totally fine. It's clean. But the filter isn't fine enough to filter out the molecules that give it the flavour, so you'll still have a little bit of a taste to those tannins that are in the water. The Pure Clear filter, on the other hand, will remove those, meaning that the water tastes completely clear, completely pure, and completely fresh. So one other thing to consider. They've improved this bottle recently in that the filter is now longer. The previous version of this, it didn't have a super high flow rate, so it was hard to drink fast from, but this, you can see they've improved that quite a lot. And one big advantage this has over other types of filter bottle, you sometimes get ones that are like straws, are that you can filter from this really easily into another bottle or another soft flask. And that's what I do when I want to put my tailwinds, put my nutrition into my flask. So I've got a packet of tailwinds here. There's my normal flask. Open that up and tip in the tailwind powder. Tailwind, before you add the water, actually tastes a little bit like a sherbet dib dab, except somewhat salty. Now, if you have the older version of this, you're thinking, is it worth upgrade? Yes, it definitely is. The older version, when you were squeezing it like this, it was only really coming out in sort of a trickle, so it took forever to filter quite a lot of water, whereas this one's much faster. Now, the downside of this type of filter, I've already mentioned one, is that the lifespan isn't as great as a fibre filter, although I still think it's loads. But the other downside is that the flow rate isn't as fast as a fibre filter. Now, it's faster than it was, but it is slightly slower, but it kind of makes sense. This is filtering out a lot more stuff, a lot more nasty, so you would kind of expect that it would take slightly longer. But that took me like 60 seconds or something like that. If you're doing a really long trail run, 60 seconds is nothing.
And that's the reason why my preferred water filter is the Pure Clear water filter. Hopefully you find that useful. If you're interested in getting one of these, there's a link down in the description. And now I'm going to go back to finishing off the other video, which you can watch. Cheers. Bye-bye.